now we have a panel with only ladies. For us, that is very common, but usually it's not so common. The boss of the panel is our data director, Daniela Chekon, and Dani will present all the ladies in the panel. The panel will be about, let's see, getting grip on pay. For instance, in India, how do you do that? To have more ideas about algorithms, how does it work, waiting time and not being paid, and gender pay gap, and then more in depth. So, Dani, take the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Pauline. Thanks, Uma, for the super interesting presentation. So as Pauline was saying, now we'll try and have a bit of a deeper insight in some of the topics you already mentioned. And yeah, we will start with going to India to see what's the situation there. And to help us, we have Rupa Korde. Well, I don't know if I should read the whole presentation. I can. So she's assistant professor of economics at Flame University in India and director operations at Wage Indicator. She conducted salary surveys in her country among riders. So she really knows what reality looks like there. So thanks, Rupa.
Can I share my screen?
I think so now. Akash is out. Yes, now you should be able. Yeah.
Right. So I was asked to keep it short to 3 minutes, and I'll try to do that. What I'm going to talk about is what we found in the surveys, and also comparing what wages they got, because the whole idea of this webinar is about the wages. The main results show that the workers' wages the gig workers' wages are uncertain. They are not sure about how much they'll earn in the next time period. There is no provision for sick leave. They are not paid sick leave. There is no disability insurance. Most of the payments are done through contracts, but the number without contracts is also quite high. So there is a contract, but often those contracts are not followed. Every month, the payment varies. It is not same. And most of the gig workers, their payments are based on tasks performed, number of deliveries or number of services, the amount of services they rendered, it's based on that. We also have presented over here the worker profile. Most of the gig workers are young workers, and there are very few female workers, especially in the delivery platforms or in the taxi platforms. This is slightly disturbing, that the median wage of gig workers of our sample. So we conducted surveys across 10 platforms in India, and we had more than 660 respondents. The monthly median wage comes to 20,000 rupees, Indian rupees. The minimum wage, of course, people know over here that the minimum wage system is quite complicated in India, but I've just taken based on how our response was in terms of the survey. The minimum wage in West Bengal and minimum wage in New Delhi. So it is higher than the minimum wage, but if we look at the living wage, it is way lower than that. They are earning below the living wage. The source of all these wages is wage indicator databases. What I thought would be interesting is to share with you, the survey had a set questionnaire, but while we were interacting with the workers, they had a lot of stories to tell us. And I think Uma also brought out already in her presentation. So workers are charged commission. They pay a very high commission. The payments made to the worker are per delivery, and they are quite low. Platforms often promise the workers incentives based on their deliveries, but workers have found that they are not paid to them. They have a fixed starting time, but there is no fixed ending time of the day. Also, what I have picked up over here essentially is all those things that affect their pay. So the platforms are using each and everything to penalize the workers in terms of payments. So if they don't wear their uniform, or if the delivery package breaks or is damaged, or the food spills, anything that happens, there is a penalty, a monetary penalty for the workers. If there is a complaint raised by the client in terms of missing delivery or missing packages or anything, in that case, like Uma mentioned earlier, that the algorithms comes into picture over here. They are not given the next order quickly. They are given an hour break depending upon the complaint. Maybe a day they'll not get any work. So everything affects their pay. This is what I tried to have in all the red blocks that you see on the screen are basically what affects the pay. I tried to bring the yellow blocks here in terms of how the algorithms work against them, but there are also some positives which you see in the green blocks here. So there are some platforms who meet and give bonuses. There is a provision for gas money, which is given to workers, and some platforms pay it regularly every 2 or 3 days. Some platforms reimburse their workers in the form of gift vouchers and food coupons, which they can use anywhere to pay. Yeah, that's all. Thank you. I hope it was in time.
Yeah. Thank you, Rupa. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will pick them up after the presentations. Okay, now from India, we go to Buenos Aires, Argentina, with Ariela Micha and Francisca Pereira. So Ariela is an economist and postdoctoral fellow based on, at the economics department at the Universidad Nacional de General Sarmiento. She does research on gender and the labor market, as well as on care policies. And she holds a PhD in social sciences from the same university. Francisca is based at the Instituto de Ciencias in the same university. She does research on gender and labor studies. She has extensively studied the situation of care workers in Argentina, with particular emphasis on domestic service. She currently directs the project, the Platform Economy and Personal Services in the Buenos Aires metropolitan area, implications on working conditions and gender inequalities. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if everything is all right. So, as we were presented, my name is Ariela, and my colleagues and I are studying the platform economy in the Buenos Aires metropolitan area. Within the framework of this big project, today I'm going to present our research on gender inequalities, focusing on 2 occupational cases, which are ride-hailing and the delivery of products. And this study is based on in-depth interviews and a quantitative survey with platform riders and drivers, both male and female workers. So in this short presentation, we wanted to highlight 3 main findings. The first finding is that although the 2 occupations under study are predominantly male-dominated, Available local data indicates that platforms are facilitating female participation. And the data shows that while in traditional employment, female participation is almost non-existent in these occupations, currently women represent around a fifth of all platform workers involved as either app-based riders or drivers. Secondly, we wanted to stress that we have done an analysis of how economic performance is influenced by the choice of time of service provision across working days. And this analysis shows that female workers tend to participate to a lesser extent in working times that are peak in terms of demand, particularly at night and during weekends. And this points to certain obstacles female workers face to take advantage of the more profitable days and time slots. According to the qualitative fieldwork, women tend to avoid working at night because they want to stay at home with their children, first of all. This also happens during weekends when it is more complicated to set care arrangements. But another important reason for these choices is that they feel more vulnerable towards street insecurity, violence, and harassment. In addition, we wanted to highlight that even when women work at night, they try to avoid certain areas perceived as unsafe to a greater extent than men. And also, they tend to refuse or cancel services if they distrust the person who requested it. So taking all this into account, we have done a gender gap analysis in weekly hours worked and in earnings, in hourly income. After including these explanatory variables linked to preference towards days of the week and time slots, the analysis reveals that both in the delivery and ride-hailing samples, there is a significant gender gap in weekly hours worked. While in terms of hourly income, a significant gender gap is only found for the delivery sample. In terms of the determinants, we wanted to highlight for the delivery sector 3 main determinants. First of all, being a migrant is a relevant factor associated with more hours spent working through a platform, and this is linked to the significant weight of migrant labor in this occupation. Then for female riders, a relevant factor explaining longer working hours is if they use a motorcycle for work as opposite of using a bike. And this factor is also associated, as may be expected, with higher hourly income, both for male and female workers. So this finding is consistent with one of the gender asymmetries that came up during our research, namely that women usually have more difficulties accessing the most efficient vehicles, and generally they work using bicycles, while men tend to use motorbikes. And interestingly, in the case of ride-hailing, there are no gender disparities among drivers who enter the platform with their own car, as opposite of paying a rental for it. So this is a difference that we find in terms of access to the most efficient and the cheapest way to get to the working asset in order to have an earning within the platforms. Finally, in both samples, we find that having any person who is dependent economically from the worker induces a greater hour engagement on the platform, but it's interesting to note that this effect is relevant only for male workers. And this points to the case, again, of the care responsibilities, which fall predominantly on women, because in the case of women, although having dependents may generate a movement towards more working hours, this could be compensated by the fact that these same dependents, mostly minor children, generate a demand for care, which tends to fall predominantly on them. Okay, thank you, that's it.
Thank you, Ariela. Okay, so now we will focus a bit more on the topic of unpaid waiting time, which was already mentioned by Uma in her presentation, with Valeria Pulignano. She's professor in sociology at the Center for Sociological Research in Leuven. She has published extensively on topics related to the sociology of work, comparative European industrial relations, labor markets and inequality, working conditions, job quality, and workers' voice. She serves as principal coordinator of the research network on work, employment, and industrial relations within the European Sociological Association, and she's co-researcher at CRMIMT at the University of Montreal and Laval in Canada. Welcome, Valeria.
Thank you very much to everybody, and I'll try also to share the screen. Yes, can you see it? Yeah. Yeah, okay, great. So first of all, thank you for, yeah, that's now better, I guess. Yes. So thank you very much for having me here today. It's very interesting to be with all of you and to hear all these stories. So I'll try to focus on this issue of unpaid labor and platform work, which also in fact came also very much into the presentation of Uma. Well, first of all, let me say very briefly, this is the data I'm going to present are based on a European Research Council project, which is always interesting and important to acknowledge. And yeah, so my presentation is quite long, but I'll try to keep attention on some important slides. Well, first of all, let me say that, well, when we talk about unpaid, it comes to me always, and I think also to all of you, this kind of case in the UK related to the Supreme Court clarifying working time, because working time can be a lot of relation with unpaid in terms of waiting time, and waiting time, in fact, it is one of the most important source of unpaid, and we find it also very much into our research. So here we see that the court tried to get grip of these and trying to, in fact, reduce the incidence of waiting time as unpaid for this taxi driver of Uber in London. Now, well, let me also framing a bit that the results I'm going to present are also based on research which was undertaken in the period 2019, 2020, 2021, where we have been doing a lot of collection of qualitative data in different ways, and also working diaries with workers. Now, in particular sectors, of course, there is still perhaps a lot out there that we need to discover, but nevertheless, I think that we were able to shed light on the important aspects of the unpaid and their own driving forces. So let me perhaps go directly into the platforms that we have been investigating. As I said, you will be able to perhaps access the presentation afterwards and to have a much more in-depth look at the details of the presentation. But this is how it looks like. And today I will focus in particularly on the food delivery and crowd work freelancing. Now, let me say that, so I want to shed light on some problems that we have been detecting in looking at unpaid and the forms of unpaid in platform work. Well, first of all, let me start for the food delivery. So what we see here is that in food delivery, as I said before, a lot of this unpaid comes through the form or under the form of waiting time. And this is the most important forms of unpaid, although I must say that there are also some non-time-based forms of unpaid, but prevalently, we have these time-based forms of unpaid coming through waiting time. Now, what is also important here, perhaps to say that aside these, we have been able to assess, the kind of diversities across different platforms where we envisaged and we could see that waiting time was an important source of unpaid. And what we could see here is that particularly waiting time is prominent source of unpaid in those platforms using a piece rate system. And perhaps this is also not a surprise, because in fact, these platforms like Deliveroo and Glovo, they try to incentivize people through piece rate system to work and to be there available for them. But at the same time, the access they give to platform through apps, although it is free and guarantees freedom to access to the platform, it doesn't guarantee always access to work. And this gap between the access to the platform and the access to work creates a lot of waiting time unpaid that we have been able to detect. Now,
sorry, Valeria, sorry to interrupt you, but I think there's a problem with your presentation, like it's stuck on the first slide.
Oh, sorry.
So by the way you're talking, it looks like you are actually moving the slides, but we don't see it.
I don't know,
so
because I can see it. I can see it.
Maybe reshare, like stop sharing and reshare.
Yeah.
Because I see your mouse thinking.
Yeah. It's no problem. It's very interesting. Yeah. But, do you see now? Yeah. And then put them on the screen.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. So perhaps was the mode there was. Okay. So I'll go directly. Sorry for that. Well, you will have the presentation, so you will be able to look at it. So I was basically here, and what I wanted to say is that aside these, waiting time under forms of, or regulatory forms of piece rate system, we also we have been able to detect that on other platforms, like for example, Takeaway and My Menu, where they work with this hourly paid system, where we were, of course, seeing, okay, so does this different way of working mitigates unpaid? Well, it mitigates unpaid, but not everywhere, in the sense that it mitigates unpaid only under conditions of guaranteed shifts and hours. And we do know that in these platforms, at least at the time that we have been undertaking our research, this kind of guaranteed shifts and hours were very much kind of restricted. So in other words, what I want to say is that also in these platforms, we have been able to detect a lot of waiting time unpaid. Now, the situation is a bit different when we go and look at freelancing, in the sense that in freelancing, well, we also see a lot of unpaid work going on in different forms, perhaps, a bit less straightforward shape towards waiting time, but nevertheless, at the end of the day, a lot of waiting times come out also here in terms of time invested for job searching, job application, doing extra tasks in order to, gain trust and confidence vis-a-vis the clients, but also this kind of element that also Uma was indicating, this kind of having to pay in order to work, which comes in terms of different fees, commissions fees that people have to pay in order to access that platform and be able to work. What we also have been in, particularly found interesting to look at is the way in which different country settings and the transnational dimension of, in most of the cases, platform working with freelancers, how these also, to a certain extent, intersect with this unpaid. And we found quite evidence here, because we see that for these non-location-bound platform, undercutting conditions and income on an international scale is a common practice. For example, think about a Polish self-employed who doesn't have to pay any social contribution, and a Belgian self-employed who has to pay social contribution. So there is a kind of interesting situation which comes out there, which creates what we see being a kind of race to the bottom. Again, we also see a lot of within country, no registered informal freelancers, which out-compete with registered official freelancers. And this is, for example, the case of Adlands and Mold. And these effects are particularly exacerbated under situation of lock-in. In other words, under situation in which the platform requests to the freelancers to be rated through rating system, performance measurement. So we see that there, this lock-in effect actually exacerbate the situation of unpaid, which is experienced. And therefore, and I leave it out there, we really claim that it is very important, as has been also highlighted by Pauline and Uma very much, the necessity to really look at effective way to regulate the platform economy in terms of introducing minimum standards, collective bargaining rights, information and transparency particularly, so transparency of information for workers as an important element in order to try to mitigate the effect and the occurrence of unpaid in platform economy. And here are some also publications for people who might be interested in looking at our work. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Valeria. Super interesting. Okay, our next presentation will focus on algorithms. So we have here Ana Ginesi Fabrellas, who's an associate professor of labor law at ESADE and director of the Institute for Labor Studies. Her research focuses on platform work and the impact of technology and algorithms in the labor relationship. And she's the leading investigator of the Horizon 2020 project Equal for Europe and the project Laboral Algorithm, funded by the Spanish Ministry of Science and Innovation. Welcome, Anna.
So good afternoon, everyone. Let me also share my screen. Oops, sorry, can you see it correctly?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. Let me start by thanking the organizers of the presentation for the invitation and for allowing me to participate in this such amazing webinar. I've been taking a lot of notes, learning a lot of things, so it has been very, very interesting. As Daniela mentioned, I will focus my presentation on algorithms and what is their role in pay in gig work. So I think it's safe to say, and this is something that was explained in the video at the beginning, that gig work is generally characterized by an absolute uncertainty. So workers don't generally know beforehand the pay that they will receive. And this is a result of three intrinsic characteristics of platform work. So first, platforms, sorry, I didn't pass the slide. So first, platform work is characterized by the absence of a minimum guaranteed working time. So given the use of hiring on demand, workers are only hired when there is a petition of a service or when they click on a specific task, and they are only hired for the exact duration of the task or the service. So the de facto use of the 0-hour contract generates an extreme labor insecurity in terms of pay. Workers don't know beforehand how many services they will be able to provide, how many tasks will be available, and as a result, they don't know what their pay is going to be. So working time and pay as a result in the gig economy is absolutely unpredictable. And it's true that workers could estimate their pay given the number of hours that they are logged on the platform. However, this leads us to the second element, and it's that this time of connection is not considered working time, strictly speaking, and as a result, is not paid work. And the third element that determines this uncertainty in pay in gig work is a result of algorithmic insecurity derived from algorithmic management. So digital labor platforms, as Uma explained before, usually use gaming strategies and algorithmic management techniques whereby workers' prior activity in the platform is used to determine their future activity. So platforms create rankings or levels that workers must pass to reach specific position within the platform and to reach a higher level of pay. So these gaming and algorithmic management techniques contribute to uncertainty in pay because workers don't know beforehand what are the metrics, what are the variables that the platform is using to determine their pay and their access to tasks and services. And not only this, but platforms regularly change these metrics without prior information to workers. So they change these metrics so as to adjust the available labor force in the platform to adjust it to its business needs. And this increases the insecurity in terms of pay. So given this scenario, the question is whether it is possible to get a grip on pay in gig work. And as part of the answer to this, I know there are different other proposals that are absolutely necessary, but as a way or answer to how to get a grip on pay, I think we can use three regulations that we have already in progress or adopted within the European Union. I think three EU regulations could be used as an example to contribute to this objective of getting a grip on pay in gig work. So the first one is the current EU regulation regarding working time that requires employers to pay employees all the time that they are available to provide services. So according to EU law, specifically according to the doctrine of the European Court of Justice, in the European Union, this time that workers are connected, are logged on the platform, should be in fact paid. The second regulation that we could use as example is the Directive on Transparent and Predictable Working Conditions. So this directive requires employers to inform workers about the days and hours that they can be requested to provide services. And this directive is interesting because it establishes that even in an unpredictable labor environment, there must be a minimum of predictability regarding working time, and as a result, also in terms of pay. And finally, the third regulation that we can use as an example is the proposed directive on platform work, because one of its objective is to increase transparency requirements. And this is something we related to something that I just read on the chat. But this proposed directive requires platforms to inform workers about the use of algorithms to adopt automated decisions in terms of assigning tasks or schedules or pay. And it also obliges the platforms to inform workers about the variables used to adopt such decisions. So this increase in transparency, I think it's very important also to get a grip on pay in gig work. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna. So I was checking the chat if there are questions. I see that there was a question for Rupa and she's already picked up. And I see a lot of conversations going on with Uma, so that's great. I've got a question for, I would say, Valeria and Anna as well. So in your presentations, you mentioned a lot of unpaid activities, unpaid working time, all of that. And I wanted to ask you whether you think a wage or a tariff, like an hourly tariff in case of a self-employed, could be a solution where you could include the cost of these unpaid activities, the cost of occupational tools, for example, or for the bike and things like that, and clearly specified in these hourly rates. Could that work? And for Anna in particular, wouldn't it also sort of minimize the effect of the algorithm? Because if you have a minimum pay that includes all these unpaid things, then, I mean, the algorithm can, at least for the wage part, can only improve it if it can't go below.
Thank you, Daniela, for this question. I'll just step in and answer, and maybe after Valeria can continue. I mean, I think that's a very good idea. I've read people proposing this, and I think it's interesting because we have to take into account that so that labor model, the working time that is in platform works is not the same as in regular work. So in the minimum wage, in the minimum hourly wage, I think we should factor in the fact that not all working time is being effectively paid. So I would think that establishing a minimum hourly rate that's even higher than in other works could be interesting. In any case, I think this would decrease the level of uncertainty of pay in platform work. But I think that we also need transparency measures, because the use of algorithms to automatically assign tasks or schedules or to determine pay requires this information. Not only this, I only focused on information in the presentation, but we should guarantee that there is, for example, no discrimination. I have my doubts that the current pricing technique used by a lot of digital platforms, I think that it could lead to a discrimination essentially based on gender. We already have a decision from Tribunale di Milano regarding the platform Globo in this sense. So I think we also need measures to guarantee algorithmic transparency.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and thanks to Anna for kicking off. I fully agree with what she said, Perhaps one thing I would add on these is, well, to me, again, it is a question of how you increase transparency in fact of information. And so it's very much to do with the functioning of technology, the way in which platform match by, for example, bidding, not bidding, whether they use or they don't use reputation. So this is very important because, you know, this has an implication on the way in which we think whether, you know, this hourly tariff can work or not. At the same time, I would say different sectors might function differently. In other words, freelancing is one thing, riders is another thing, or taxi drivers is completely different. So there might be there a kind of, at a certain point, there should be there a kind of really tailored solutions in different sectors. Well, I think that at a certain point should also be important to be tackled. Because sometimes we think platform economy is everything, but this is not. And the transparency and the way in which technology works might have different effects on different sort of, you know, sectors and work performed. So that's the only thing I wanted to add, but for the rest,
Thank you very much. Then going to India and Argentina, I would like to ask to Rupa, Francisca, and Ariela, what would be the first thing that they would do that could improve the situation in their countries? So maybe in the case of Argentina, to help close the gender pay gap, which they found, and in India to improve the working conditions of platform workers. Also picking maybe from what has been mentioned already that is being done in the EU.
I can maybe answer quickly.
Sure.
So one is the transparency. The workers do not have the information that is shared with the users, the clients. And all the riders or the delivery people are often like, whenever they deliver, they'll be kind enough to ask you and they'll tell you to give them a rating because they know that's going to affect what's going to happen later. But they have no access to this information. Also, new platforms come up. I think there's at least one new platform in India every day. Not every day, maybe every month. But when a platform is new, the payment per delivery is quite high. But later on, as the platform becomes popular, the payments reduce. So often these riders want to, or these delivery people want to change their platforms and move to some high-paying platforms. But the data which they have earlier, like the good ratings, etc., is not transferred over here. I know that Martin's firm works on in Netherlands, but there's nothing like that in India that can help riders to take their information to the next job that they move to. So this could improve their situation in a way in terms of pay and what they would get later. So that's what I can think of right now.
Thank you. And who wants to pick up?
Yes, thank you for your question, Daniela. So, of course, first of all, and taking into account the other presentations and Yuma's arguments, of course, first we need to think about this regulation of platforms. I mean, in overall terms, of course, this would be also beneficial for women workers inside these platforms. But within this overall regulation framework, we need to think of a gender-sensitive approach for future regulations in our countries. And since regulation is being thought in these past years, I mean, it's not settled yet. We have there a space where to think of gender-sensitive policies specifically. And according to our research, this would be, first of all, the preservation of flexible schedules seems a key issue in order to allow women to continue participating in these activities, especially in these male-dominated activities, which are predominantly in ride-hailing and delivery services, which were our occupational studies, case studies. But then, of course, this has to take into account that this widely exceeds platform labor and is related to structural gender inequalities in the social distribution of care. So this also depends on the specific regulation in terms of care arrangements and the care agenda in the specific countries. But then also we have to think of these the algorithmic bias that may be influencing this gender pay gap or the gender gap in weekly hours worked. So platform policies like establishing privileges or penalizations associated with hourly engagement, speed, or job rejections should be reconsidered and redesigned, because in our research we find that they tend to deepen the gender inequalities in terms of hourly earnings. Finally, in terms of ride-hailing and delivery services, it is central and mostly important to reaffirm the safe mobility of women, because these are two occupations that depend on this in order to promote fuller participation of female in these occupations. Because many of the problems that we find in terms of women participation and economic performance in these occupations relate to the safe mobility, because they have to work during the nights and in the public sphere as a specific feature of this occupation that is of these two occupations that is different to other platform-based occupations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your insights. I think it was like really a super interesting, interesting panel. We are on time, so I guess we can head back to Pauline. And of course, if you have questions on these presentations, you can just type them in the chat, and I'm sure we can all answer.
Because I have my
thanks a lot, Dani. Thanks for your cool panel. It is actually nice to know that in a half a year time, we will go really in depth on anything related to gender and let's say inclusivity. So that will be the new topic to explore even much more.